Good morning. Welcome to the King's Report for the fourth month and third day by the heavenly calendar in the 16th year of Chungi. Tim Elder sitting in for the second king now, Chungi Young Moon. And on Wednesdays, we do something special, don't we? We sort of set aside the news of the day and we look more deeply at true Father's teaching, because it is on the basis of those teachings that we are actually looking at the news and world events and so forth. And today is the third Wednesday when we are studying uh, this speech by Father, Cosmic Assembly for the Settlement of the True Parents of Heaven, Earth, and Humankind, and for the Proclamation of the Word by God's Substantial Self. That's the title. Yes, it's a mouthful. Yes, and the speech itself is quite a dense speech. Um, and I've explained before that Father wanted all blessed couples, blessed families, to have a copy of his delivery copy. In other words, the same font size and all the Hancha, the Chinese characters that Father has in his copy and so forth. And he did that so he can say, turn to page 53 or turn page to 73 or something like that. So we were all sitting there with these copies of this speech, and um, he would focus on one particular page or something like that. And at one point, he would say, for example, the content on page 53 is what I received when I was 53 years old. Sometimes some of the content matched the age that he was when he said he received that content. Anyway, we are on page 32 of 73. And I'm looking at the Korean copy here on my left, and but I'm sharing the English copy, the English with you on the screen, and they are not necessarily the same. The Korean copy, which is the copy that the Korean Church turned into a booklet and distributed to all families, is dated April 24th, 2011, whereas the English copy is dated, what was it? I think it was, anyway, sometime in 2012. But he gave this speech many, many times, and he did sort of edit it and alter it as he went along. But the thrust of it, though, is the same, and the major points are certainly the same. So as I compare the two, there are no real. I have not seen any real significant differences so far. So anyway, let's go through today with the subheading, which again, Father did not put any subheadings in his speech. These subheadings are actually by the editor of the website that we're looking at, which is tparents.org. And if you want to look at this speech yourself, I think you can see the address here in the address field here, tparents.org/moon hyphen talks /Sungmyung 12 /Sungmyung dash 120108b.htm. So anyway, you can go to tparents.org, and they have a search facility there, so that you can find this speech there if you'd like to see it yourself. So anyway, let's go through what he's saying about the mission of the Korean people. All people of the Christian faith recognize that God sent his true son, Jesus Christ, to earth 2,000 years ago to save humankind. However, Jesus suffered a miserable fate. The leaders of Judaism and people of Israel were supposed to receive Jesus as the Messiah and follow him with absolute faith, absolute love, and absolute obedience. They should never have allowed Jesus' crucifixion to take place. He suddenly left this world, leaving behind the words, "It is finished," if these words apply to spiritual salvation only, and he promised to return. This, of course, is one area that traditional Christians have trouble with, unless they really think about it with an open mind. Um, Earlier today, and for our morning hundoke, we're reading this book, the life and love of Jesus. It's in Korean. Let me just unshare this for a minute so you can see this. the life and love of Jesus. 예수님의 생애와 사랑. And this is actually a collection of quotations from Father about Jesus and about the background of Jesus's birth. And so it's not all about Jesus. For example, there was a large section on Tamar, for example, and because Tamar had in Father's teaching, Tamar had an important role in facilitating the birth of the birth of Jesus. And also there was a large section on Jacob and Esau, for example. But today we were reading about Jesus, Father's words about Jesus, and he was asking, was it necessary for the Messiah, for God's Son to die in order for humanity to be saved? And didn't Jesus say, "I am the way, the truth, and the life, and whoever shall believe in me, what did he say? That no one can go to the God but except through him. No one can go to the Father except through him." And he said, Jesus, and Father was saying, pointing out that Jesus said these things before he was crucified. Okay, so before he was crucified. So before he was crucified, Jesus was telling people, "Hey, believe in me, and you can go to the Father." So he was offering salvation prior to his crucifixion. That's one point that Father is making in today's reading, for example. So I know that traditional Christians, feel that Jesus' death was necessary, even to the point of. I heard one pastor say that, well, in what is it? I think yes, in the book of Acts, I think it was, where uh, it says, well, if the I don't have the exact biblical quote in front of me, but if the leaders had realized who Jesus was, they would not have crucified him. I think you know which verse I'm referring to. That's a rough quotation, but I think you know which one I'm referring to. And the pastor said, "Aren't we lucky? We really dodged a bullet, because if they had realized who he was, they would not have crucified him, and there would have been no salvation." What? So, but given the way that traditional Christians read the Bible, that is a logical conclusion, isn't it? Right? But Father would say, and I would say also, there's something wrong with that logic. There's something very wrong with that way of thinking. That we were lucky that no one knew who Jesus was, because if they knew he was the Messiah that Jews has been waiting for 2,000 years or 4,000 years, they would not have crucified him, and then we'd all be stuck without salvation. That seems a bit ridiculous to me, but I don't know. I suppose, but no. It's just plain ridiculous. That's all. Yeah. So I hope that people will, examine their assumptions and stand back and think, well, wait a second. What would have happened if Jesus had not been crucified? What would have happened if Jesus had not been crucified? Right? When he began his ministry, Jesus was going around saying, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand." So what would have happened if the people had repented? Right? And when Jesus said John the Baptist was Elijah, what would have happened if the Jewish clergy said, "Oh, okay, we got it. John the Baptist is Elijah, so therefore it's possible that Jesus could actually be the Messiah"? What would have happened if they had taken that line of thinking, right? So there is a way in which things could have turned out differently. Then what would have happened? Well, Father's teaching is that, well, then Jesus would have taken a wife, and he would have had children. And as the second Adam, right? And the Bible does say that Jesus came as the second Adam. As the second Adam, he would have then restarted or rebooted God's lineage on this earth as a true olive tree. And then all the wild olive trees then, in other words, all of humanity would have been grafted onto his lineage at some point, and so that human beings could return to God's lineage. And it takes a bit of a, and it takes a bit of a courageous person, I think, a philosophically courageous person, theologically courageous person, to begin to think that way, to begin to question the traditional belief, the 2,000-year belief that salvation depended on Jesus dying as being crucified for our sins, right? So anyway, he suddenly left this world, leaving behind the words, "It is finished." Yet these words applied to spiritual salvation only, and he promised to return. So spiritual salvation was uh, a secondary victory that Jesus was able to claw out from the very difficult situation that he found himself in. And because we are not forced to love God, and we're not forced to accept Jesus, we are not forced to accept the Messiah, God cannot and Jesus cannot simply decree that he is the Messiah and you're going to get zapped by lightning if you don't believe in me. No, he, God is not a dictator. He is an educator. He is an educator. And don't eat of the fruit. That was education. And everything that Jesus said was education, and everything that True Father has said is education. And even though Jesus was forced to go the way of the cross, even then he did not uh, become a kind of a dictator. And so, as the second king has pointed out, when Jesus comes again, he's not going to be a dictator because God is the same, past and present and future. So he's not going to be a dictator, and people will still have the option to reject him and refuse him as they did previously. And Father was active on the earth. Well, his public mission began in 1945. August of 1945, together with the liberation of Korea from Japan, and continued in his physical body. Until by the Gregorian calendar, September 3rd, 2012. And he's still continuing. Father's still continuing. He is no longer in his physical body, but he is still continuing to lead the providence. He's still leading the providence in both the spirit world and the physical world as an educator, not as a dictator. And so that is why we are reading his words here, because these are words that he left to us that we could study, and so that we could believe more deeply ourselves, and also help others to believe as well that he is, in fact, the Christ at the second advent, and that he is, in fact, the way, the truth, and the life, and the love. Father said, you got to have love. You got to add the word love there, way, the truth, and the life, and the love. And it is through him that we are able to go to the Father. All right, so anyway, so Jesus suddenly left this world, leaving behind the words, "It is finished," and these words apply to spiritual salvation only, and he promised to return. Ladies and gentlemen, God quietly raised and prepared the Korean people over a period of thousands of years. And uh, I just want to say one thing, get one thing off my chest. I have heard it said that, the Korean people have failed. And so now America has to become the atom country. And to me, this is a very shallow way of thinking. As it says here, God raised and prepared the Korean people over a period of thousands of years. And Koreans say that their history is 5,000 years. Okay, we'll take their word for it. So if it took God 5,000 years to prepare the Korean people to become the atom nation, all right, How many thousands of years do you suppose it will take God to prepare America to become the atom nation? Americans do not speak the atom language. Shall I go on? No, let's not rub it in too far. I think God is telling me that's enough. All right. So anyway, yeah, we cannot, take it so lightly that the Korean people have failed, and uh, now there's no chance that they can fulfill the mission of the atom country. I would say that people who make such a statement um, uh, uh, are not aware of the power of God and the power of True Father. You're not going to change the fact, the historical fact, that True Father was born in Korea. That's not going to change. And, Father's words that I have here on my left, they are not going to magically turn into English. Okay. They're not going to magically turn into English. So anyway, all right, Father, I got you. I got you. I got you. He's telling me to stop. Okay. Okay. All right, let's go. After 2,000 years of preparation, his labor has finally borne fruit with the second coming of Christ on the far distant Korean peninsula. That's right. That's right. That's a historical fact. The Korean people have from long ago served God with a sense that he is their original ancestor and that they are descended from heaven. They have referred to him as the honored one, that is Hana-nim, and attended him as the Lord, creator of night and day. I would like to say here, though, that um, Catholics and Protestants in Korea have different word for God. And Hananim is the Protestant word for God. The Catholic word for God is slightly different. It's Hanulim. Hanulim. Hanur means heaven. So it's the sort of honored one of heaven, I suppose you could say, right? And for example, the Korean national anthem uh, has the word God in the first verse. So it's something to the effect that may God protect this land or something like that. Anyway, the word God appears. Protestants and Catholics sing that national anthem slightly differently. Now, the official version is Hanulim because the person who actually composed the words to the national anthem happened to be Catholic. And so the official version is Hanulim, but Protestants will always sing it Hananim. And I think because I guess Protestants have more influence in Korea than Catholics, I think the population in general, even those who do not belong to either branch of Christianity, tend to go with the Protestant version. Maybe, and I'm not sure why that is, but maybe it's because the Protestants have more influence, I guess. But anyway, just to let you know that that is the case, and there's a historical reason for that, because Catholics came first to Korea. They were heavily persecuted, and many martyrs. And there are memorials in Seoul where people were martyred. There's a memorial actually where people were tossed off a cliff into the river, into the Han River that flows through Seoul. The Catholic Church has a memorial there. And later the Protestants came and they said, "Hey, wait a second, we're not the same as they are. All right, we're not the same. So please don't persecute us the way that you've been persecuting those guys. All right, we even have a different word for God." So they made sure to differentiate themselves from the Catholics, and they were, by the way, largely successful in doing that. But anyway, so as a result, when people in Korea, when they're using the Korean language, and when they say Christian, they mean Protestant Christian, and even Catholics do not include themselves in the word Christian. That Christian is a word that refers to followers of Christ other than Catholics. Catholics are Catholics. They're Catholics. Everybody else is Christian. So anyway, it's some a difficult history behind there. So anyway, and attended him as Lord, creator of night and day. Thus it is that the origin of all numbers lay in one or two, one and two, one and two. Right. Okay. Yeah, okay. That's also in the Korean. So, and all the origin of all numbers. In other words, the beginning of numbers is one and two, and uh, this, of course, is different in the West because in the West, the numbers begin with a zero, right? You have single digit numbers are from 0 to 9, and then from 10, you have double digit numbers from 10 to 99. So in the West, numbers begin with zero. And this causes confusion in the counting. For example, I think last or maybe the first Wednesday we did this, we I pointed out that the English in this speech says that Father counts the number of months that a baby is in the womb is 9 months. But I said that Father would never, 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 never say 9 months. He always said 10 months, 10 months. And that has to do with the fact that in Father's counting system, in the traditional Korean counting system, you begin with one. You don't begin with zero. You don't begin with zero. Okay. So, for example, if a woman becomes pregnant in January, okay, in the Korean system, in January, she is already 1 month pregnant. Whereas in the Western uh, counting system, it is in February that she becomes pregnant. So, the baby's, let's say the baby is born in October, okay, then the Korean will say, see, born in the 10th month. Whereas the Westerner will say, see, born after 9 months. 10 minus 1 is 9, born after 9 months. So anyway, in Father's teaching, numbers begin with 1 and 2. If you look at the history of zero, it's actually very interesting, but no, let's not go into that now. Because Koreans attend such a God as their original ancestor, the spirit of interdependence, mutual prosperity, and universally shared values is alive in the soul and tradition of the Korean people. Now, these three concepts, very important in Father's teaching, because this describes the ideal world. These three concepts: interdependence, mutual prosperity, universally shared values. And I've talked about this a little bit, I think, at some point, I can't remember when, but we've talked about this a little bit. But when Father talked about Cheonryuk, in other words, the ultimate sort of kingdom of heaven that he's talking about, where people are one with God's shimjong, the irrepressible impulse of the heart to invest love in an object partner so as to experience love and joy. When people are talking about being, when all humanity is, or most of humanity, except for those who are still going through the growing period, all humanity, or at least adult humanity, is one with God's shimjong. This is what we will have: interdependence, mutual prosperity, and universally shared values. And Father's saying that this is this spirit that will govern the kingdom of heaven eventually is actually imbued in Korean tradition. Is alive in the soul and tradition of the Korean people. Mm. When I first came to Korea, I might have talked about this before, but let me talk about it again because it's important and some people may not have heard it the first time. When I first came to Korea, I heard, the lectures, the Divine Principle lecture, and uh, at the end of the Divine Principle lecture series, it describes the Korean people as a people of righteousness and loyalty and filial piety and this, that, and the other thing. And when I first came to Korea, I actually really knew next to nothing, very, very, very close to nothing about Korea. Okay. I'm sure all of you know the word kimchi. I didn't know the word kimchi. Okay. I didn't know the word kimchi. That's how little I knew about Korea. I had studied a little bit of Korean at the Unification Theological Seminary. I had one semester of a Korean language. So I had the ability to ask a taxi driver to take me to Namdaemun, for example. But that was about it. That was about it. When I met my wife, uh, uh, our initial communication took place through a translator, but when we were alone, about the only thing I could say to her was 괜찮아요, which means it's going to be all right. I just kept saying 괜찮아요, 괜찮아요, because that was the only thing. That was the only thing that I could say to her. Now, so when I first came, because my only information about Korea was what I had learned in the Divine Principle lectures. I thought that there would be no sin in Korea. That hey, it says right there in the DP that Koreans are righteous people, and certainly no prostitution in Korea, right? Absolutely no way that could happen. That bubble burst pretty quickly. But so there are a couple of things that we can say about this. One is that one thing that distinguishes God and Satan is that God will take a person or a culture, in this case, and he will find the good that is in that culture, and he will have a give and receive action with the goodness that is in the culture, so as to nurture that goodness so that it can grow and overcome the evil that is also in the culture. Uh, Contrast that with Satan, who will look at a culture or a person and find even the tiniest speck of evil and then accuse that person, accuse that person because of that evil, so as to uh, make that evil grow and overcome the good. And so we need to understand this kind of a sentence in that context. So here it said, because Koreans attend such a God as the original ancestors, the spirit of independence and universal shared values is alive in the soul and tradition of the Korean people. Right? Uh, Korea is divided by the 38th parallel, and things are very different on the two sides of that. Well, I'm sorry, that's a common misnomer. It's not divided by the 30th parallel. It's actually divided by the military demarcation line, which runs roughly along the 30th parallel, but not exactly. Um, anyway, things are very different between North and South. And some pretty terrible things happen in the North. Human life has very little value in the North, for example. Uh, and also, even in the South, there are some really, really good people. But I've met some really, really evil people too in the South. So that means to me that the 30th parallel is not just a geographical line, but it's also something that exists within society. And you know, I've lived in Korea now for more than 20 years, all told, going back and forth and everything like that. I haven't really sat down and figured out, but at least 20 years, I know. um, and uh, I've had I've had contact with a wide variety of people in Korea, in a wide variety of aspects of Korean society. Some very, very good, some not so good, some downright evil. So now what I do is that I choose to only have contact with the good. I know the evil is out there because I've experienced it, when I was here previously. but I choose to have contact only with the good. And and I think that's sort of God's position as well. Because if we just make the good grow and grow and grow, then the evil will just as a matter of course and naturally gradually lose its place in the society. And maybe that something like that is also applicable in your situation as well. Yeah. So anyway, here the Father says they have maintained themselves over 5,000 years of history, yet not once have they invaded or plundered another nation or people. The spirit of benefiting all mankind still flows in the veins of the Korean people. Just remember what I just said, right? The spirit of filial piety, fidelity, and loyalty, which are the fundamental virtues of human life, are still alive and breathing in Korean history. These values can be found in the men and women of Korea and reflect the pride and spirit of the Korean people. Okay, so just remember what I just said. Um, and truly, some of the best people that I've ever met are Koreans. Some of the worst people I've ever met are also Koreans. So, but we choose to have contact. We choose to have give and receive with the good, and let the evil sort of wither away on its own. I have inherited such traditional values as true filial piety, exemplified in the folk tale of Shimcheon, about a devoted daughter who offered her life so that her blind father could see. And I want to go into this a little bit. I looked this up on Wikipedia, and I want to, because Father often refers to these two tales. We'll talk about Chunhyang in a minute, but first about Shimcheon. And what I just said about good and evil, this also applies to this plot, by the way, because the king has said that uh, Shimcheon is there's a certain aspect of child trafficking in Shimcheon. Anyway, let's look at this. You know, the king's words, right? The summary of the tale said, long ago, northern Korea's Gwangju County had a district named Dohadong, okay, literally Peach Blossom Village, where lived a destitute family descended from the Yangban, or noble class. Well, noble class, it's the literati, really. These are people who spent their time studying Confucian texts and learning Chinese characters, for example, and so forth. And if they could get a job with the government, they were fine. But if they didn't, if they couldn't pass the test and get a job with the government, then they didn't do so well. And they became actually quite poor in many cases. And not all of them, in many cases, they were not very good farmers. And so, they had to make a living maybe teaching the village children Chinese characters or something like that, if they could. So anyway, descended from the literati class. I think rather than noble, it should be literati class. The daughter Shimcheon, okay, so there was a destitute family, and the daughter is Shimcheon, had blind man Shim as her father. So her father was blind man Shim. Okay, so Shim is the surname. Full name Shim Hakyu. Uh, and he was raising the girl alone after the death of the mother. So this is a father who's descended from the literati class, and his wife died, and so he's raising his daughter Shim Chung, or her name is Shim is the surname, and Chung is her given name. So anyway, and he's blind. Okay, he's blind. He's poor and he's blind. Blind man Shim received a tip from a Buddhist monk that he might recover his sight by offering a certain amount of rice to Buddha. All right, and the blind man pledges to do so. So, what's the daughter to do? To pay for this donation, the daughter, Shimchong, who is now 15 years old, decides to sell herself to sea merchants who plan to sacrifice her to the Indang Sea. So they need to sacrifice a young virgin to placate the sea god. And so she sells herself to the sailors so that they can, for the purpose of throwing her into the ocean. And she knows this, okay? But she does this out of loyalty to her father. And so in return, the sailors give the money for the rice to the father, and then he's able to, I think he is in the story, does in fact regain his sight. But Shimchong throws herself into the water. After Shimchong throws herself into the water, by the grace of the Jade Emperor, she is taken to the Dragon Palace. This is underwater Dragon Palace, all right, of the Dragon King. She is later sent back to the terrestrial world, contained inside a lotus flower, and is chosen as the new wife of the Chinese emperor of the Song dynasty. Now an empress, Shimchong hosts a feast for the blind and reunites with her father. Overjoyed at the reunion with his daughter, blind man Shim regains his eyesight. So it's only after at the feast that he regains his eyesight. All right, so that's the rough outline of the tale of Shimchong that Father is referring to here. And and the king is right that this is a 15-year-old girl now, and she's selling herself as a sacrifice so that the sailors can throw into the ocean to placate the sea god. Anyway, so again, Father, though he is not condoning that, he's not certainly not condoning child trafficking by lifting up this tale, but instead, Father is saying that, look, this is an example of the filial piety. Shimchong is an example of the filial piety that Koreans have historically valued. So the tale of Shimchong about a devoted daughter who offered her life so that the blind father could see. Okay, so that's one. And then the profound love and fidelity displayed by Chunhyang, who overcame the fear of death in order to keep the promise she had made to her husband. Okay, and so let's also go look at the Chunhyang tale. These are both, fictional tales that have been passed down through Korean history. And I see here on Wikipedia it says that scholars believe that the tale of Shimchong is probably an 18th century tale. Chunhyang, I think, maybe sometimes similar. I think also sometimes similar. Anyway, you got Lee Mong-yong, okay? And between the two, I think the tale of Chunhyang is the more popular in Korea. Lee Mong-yong is who always studies hard, goes out and to get some fresh air. So let's first see ourselves here. This is the main characters. So Chunhyang, whose name means spring fragrance, and her surname is Song, is the main female character, and she's the daughter of a kisang. She's very beautiful and talented in poetry and arts. She falls in love with Lee Mong-yong, and Lee Mong-yong is the main male character, who is the son of a government official, and he is intelligent and handsome, and he falls in love with Chunhyang at first sight. And actually, I think that's the only two people you need to know. Okay, so there's a bad guy in this, but I don't see a name for him. Okay, so anyway, so Lee Mong-yong, who always studies hard, goes out to get some fresh air. He sees Chunhyang on a swing, and he falls in love with her at first sight. He orders his servant Bangja to ask Chunhyang to come to him, but she refuses. Lee Mong-yong then goes to talk to Chunhyang's mother to ask permission to marry Chunhyang. The mother gives her permission, and the two young people marry that day. Okay, and then Lee Mong-yong's father, I always thought that they weren't actually married, but they were betrothed, I thought. But anyway, the thrust of the story is the same. Lee Mong-yong's father, a government official, has to move to Hanyang, which is what is Seoul today. This is a Seoul now, is a bit of a Korean English. Hanyang is the old name for Seoul. So Lee Mong-yong has to leave Chunhyang to follow his father. And this is why I don't think they actually married. I think they were betrothed, because if they were married, she would have gone with him. Anyway, Chunhyang gives Lee Mong-yong a ring as a token of her love for him and promises to stay faithful to him and wait for him to come back in the future to take her to Seoul. After he leaves, a replacement to Mong-yong's father comes to Chunyang's village. The new replacement is Pyeonhakdo. Okay, he's the bad guy, all right? A greedy and selfish person who wastes his time frolicking with kisengs. Chunyang, renowned for her beauty, is summoned by the new magistrate, although Chunyang is not a kiseng. Pyeon treats her like one because her mother was a kiseng. Pyeon orders Chunyang to work as a kiseng for him, but Chunyang refuses, stating that she has one true love. Pyeon gets angry and imprisons her. He decides to punish her on his birthday. Now, the word kiseng refers to a profession of women's profession, who would entertain male clients during sort of where there was a lot of food and also a lot of drinking, a lot of alcohol. And I've had Koreans tell me that no, they are not prostitutes. But yeah, I think at some point they were expected to have sex with their client, especially if the client was a rich and powerful local magistrate, the local governor. All right. So basically, Chunyang is refusing to. Basically, the whole point of the story is that she is maintaining her chastity in the absence of her beloved and her betrothed, even though he's gone for a long time. All right, and then Lee Mong-young wins the first place in the state examination. State examination every so often, maybe every year, or anyway, so often there would be an examination in Seoul, and then the person who wins or is first place or gets the best score, best grade on that examination is often appointed as a secret royal inspector. Yeah, kind of like Elon Musk, except so this royal inspector is charged with going around the country representing the king and looking out for fraud and passing judgment on fraudsters right then and there. He had the power to imprison, and basically he could be, if he had the evidence, he was the judge, jury, and sometimes executioner against the fraudsters. And so this was a very powerful position, and really, the king's ambassador. He was representing the king, and so Mong-young is appointed to this position, and he comes back to the village with that position, okay, who investigates, prosecutes corrupt government officials as an undercover emissary of the king. Under disguise, he returns to Chunyang's village and finds out what has happened to Chunyang and Pyeon's abuse of power. So when he comes back to the village, he's curious. He's not sure that Chunyang has been loyal to him. And he comes out in disguise because these people always were in disguise. Because if you're going to, if you're a king's representative, of course, if you come into a village saying, "Hey, I represent the king. Is there anything funny business going on here?" People are going to say, "No, there's no funny business." But they would always go around in disguise until they discovered the fraud, and then they would pull out their royal seal and say, "Wow, this is who I am," and everybody would bow down suddenly. Sometimes there are some television shows about this, and it's entertaining. So anyway, he Mong-young impersonates a beggar in order to conceal his identity. Despite this, Chunyang loves him and asks her mother to take good care of him. Mong-young barges into Pyeon's birthday celebration uninvited and makes a satirical poem about Pyeon's misconducts, but Pyeon does not understand the poem. He discloses his real identity and punishes Pyeon. At first, Chunyang cannot recognize Yi, and he tests her fidelity by asking her to be his kiseng. Chunyang, who still cannot recognize him, refuses him as well. Deeply moved by her faithfulness, he orders his servant to show her the ring Chunyang gave him. She was shocked that it is actually her betrothed, her Yi Mon-young, and they live happily ever after. The ballet company, father's ballet company in Korea, also created a ballet with this story, and performed quite often. I'm not sure if they're still performing it or not, but in previous times they performed it quite often. So this is what Father is referring to here. So the profound love and fidelity displayed by Chunyang, who overcame the fear of death in order to keep the promise she had made to her husband. Does it say husband? Hmm. Okay, I guess it does say husband. All right, so I guess she was her husband. Okay. Made to her husband. Okay. And the unbreakable loyalty exhibited by Admiral Yi Sun Shin, well, who gave his life to save his nation and people despite being abandoned by his king and other leaders. So Admiral Yi Sun Shin is another historical figure. Well, this is actually not fiction. This is actually true. In the late 16th century, um, Japan invaded Korea. They actually, it was Hideyoshi. And if you know anything about Japanese history, you've heard of Toyotomi Hideyoshi. And uh, Hideyoshi, you know, after the death of his master Oda Nobunaga, pretty much united the country of Japan. And what to do with all these samurai who had been fighting? And Japan was coming out of a century of warfare, where the four islands, or actually three islands, were divided up among various feudal lords, and they were always fighting. They were always at war. And so, what to do with these samurai now that the country is more or less united? And so he decided, okay, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take on China. Yeah, I'm going to go to China and conquer China. And so he says to Korea, "Let me through. I want to march my army through Korea and go to China and defeat the Chinese emperor and become emperor of China." And Korea says no. And so um, the Japanese army, and actually Hideyoshi himself stays in Japan, but his generals invade Korea and do a lot of damage. But then, and then, well, Isunshin is a admiral. He is he invents actually a special kind of naval vessel. It's called the turtle vessel, where the top of the vessel is it's covered with iron, or I guess iron, yeah, iron, so that the arrows, because this is when Japan was still, that's I think was before gunpowder, but at least not widely used. I guess it was being used. Just by this time, Japan did have gunpowder, and that was one reason why Oda Nobunaga was able to unite the country. But for the most part, still they were using arrows and swords and stuff like that, and even the guns at that time did not penetrate this iron that Isunshin put on the top of his vessels, and they were also pretty quick, and they could and also Isunshin knew the currents along the southern coast of Korea, and so he caused a lot of damage to the Japanese as they were trying to invade. Anyway, they got into Korea, and people in some, the bad guys in the court in Seoul were jealous of Yi Sun-shin, and so they, uh, made up some fake news about him, and he was arrested and put in prison for a while, and then so that of course made it easier for the Japanese to bring their troops over because they no longer had this talented admiral standing in their way. But then he gets out of prison, and then around that time, Hideyoshi dies in Japan. He dies in Japan. So now all the generals under Hideyoshi saying, "Whoa, we got to get back to Japan because now there's a power vacuum, and who knows who's going to take over?" right? And actually, the person who did take over was Tokugawa, who stayed behind in Japan. Didn't so he stayed behind in Japan, kind of in the right place at the right time. So Tokugawa, of course, takes over and establishes the shogunate that lasted 250 years. But anyway, the guys who are in Korea are suddenly wanting to rush back to Japan. And Isunshin says, no, I'm not going to let a single one of you get back to Japan. You invaded our country. Now I'm going to kill all of you. So even though he was mistreated by his king and by his country, he was betrayed by his king, betrayed by his country. Still, he continued to fight for his country, and he actually died in battle. And even as he was dying, he was struck by I think by an arrow or a bullet or something. Anyway, he was there dying, and he says, "Don't let the enemy know that I'm dying." This is a famous quote by him. So don't let the enemy know that I'm dying, or don't let our people know that I'm dying, because if they do, if then our people will lose heart, and we might not win the battle. And so he's very famous for that quote. So anyway, the point is that the unbreakable loyalty exhibited by Yi Sun-shin, even though he was betrayed by his country and by his and by the people in the court and by the king. So these lofty Korean values and traditions are not just matters of historical chance. But remember, the people who betrayed Yi Sun-shin, what nationality were they? Okay, they were not Chinese. They were not Russians. Okay, just to make that point. Okay, the bad guys in these stories, they're also Koreans. So just to make that point, okay. All right. The magistrate who wanted Chun Hyang to betray her husband, he was also Korean, right? Okay. Anyway, so but like I said, we have we form our relationships with the good. All right, so these lofty Korean values and traditions are not just matters of historical chance. Based on these values, heaven has prepared this people. This was all part of the providence of creating a foundation to send the returning Messiah. And that is true. That is true. So, of course, the Korean people are not perfect and far, far, far from perfect. Um, but this foundation to receive the Messiah was, in fact, laid within Korean tradition. On the foundation of such preparation and riding on the energy of the peninsula, I finally came, having received heaven's seal as the true parent of humankind and the King of Kings. Right. So their Father is making declaration that he received heaven's seal as the true parent of humankind and that he is the King of Kings. Praise God. Praise God. When Father went to America and began his work in America, he didn't begin uh, in the most holy place in America. He went to New York, and uh, it's a famous, well-known passage in his words about how he stood on Fifth Avenue and wept. Also, near the end of his mission in his physical body, where was he working? He was focusing on Las Vegas, again, where there's a concentration of evil. And so I think also we could say that um, it's also providentially significant that there is also this evil within Korea, and that because this is where that kind of evil can be resolved. Talked about Shimchong being in part about human trafficking, and uh, there is still human trafficking going on in Korea today. . not quite as overt as it was, but but even fairly recent past, it was not too uncommon for a poor family to sell their daughter into sexual slavery, or to sell their daughter uh, in order for the family to survive. Um, so I think that certainly, but it's certainly true what Father says, that it's that Korean people were prepared, and that these heavenly virtues were planted in Korean tradition, even though not all Koreans would adhere to them. The path that humankind should take, distinguished guests, your excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the path that humanity must now take is clear. What would give you cause to hesitate in the face of the D-Day that heaven has revealed through us, the true parents? And as I mentioned, D-Day was the 13th day of the first month of 2013, not January 13th, but the 13th day of the first month of the heavenly calendar. There are now only 600 days remaining. Heaven's blessings will be with you on your ambitious and busy course. The Father was counting down the days until that day, the first month and 13th day. If you view the flow of history through the eyes that focus on God's providence, you can see that the changes of the times can be broadly classified in three stages. First was the nature-centered era, a time when instinctual feelings, materialism, and a closeness to animals and the things of creation were prevalent. And in Korean, he uses the word 물총 시대, 물총. 물총, of course, is thing or object, and 정 is, well, it's the 정 of 심정, right? So here, it's a difficult word to translate in English because there is no equivalent in English. So think, what is the English word here? Nature-centered era. 물정. Well, it's not a very close to. I think if we were to think about it for a while, we'd probably come up with a better translation. But it's 물정 시대. Okay. Anyway, this obviously refers to a time in human history when human beings were close to nature, and 물청, 청, 청, 청 is interesting that Father says 물청, 물본주의, 물주유우선. I think this explanation in English I think is good, though. A time when instinctual feelings, materialism, and closeness to animals and the things of creation were prevalent. So this is kind of talking about a sort of a what shall we say, not or prehistory, I suppose, but yeah, I suppose we could say prehistory. Next came a human-centered era. Okay, human, and then Father says 인정 시대. In, of course, is human, and Chong again, same as 물정, then 인정. Again, there's no, and these are words that Father is creating, right? And I often say that Father is a translator. He takes God's truth and he sort of shoehorns it into the Korean language. He translates it into the Korean language. And the Korean language, although it is, yes, in many ways prepared to do that job of receiving God's truth, it is still a product of fallen history. And so, and there is no human language that will fully and adequately express God's truth, because every human language is a product of fallen history. So what Father would do often was he would make new words, and this is what he's doing here. Sometimes he would give new definitions to existing words. And cosmos, for example, is one of those cases. But here he's making a new word, and so we have to make a new word in English as well. So, and here, nature-centered era is the translator's best effort to translate Murjong Shide. And then human-centered era is the translator's best effort to translate Injong Shide. When people's knowledge, feelings, and emotions took precedence and dominated the world. So this is more of I guess, time of history now, and maybe even Father's referring to the scientific age. However, these eras were transitional. They were courses of preparation necessary in order to enter the era in which people could rid themselves of their fallen nature, return to their original selves, and live as one united family when they attend God as their Father. Let's just finish this paragraph, all right? And when that happens, we will enter a God-centered era. Now, this is God-centered era is 천정 시대. So, Father does not say God. He says heaven. Chun is heaven. Okay. A final stage in which human beings who know and feel God's heart and will follow the path of living for the sake of others. They will do this through establishing an absolute standard on the foundation of purifying themselves both inside and out through the holy blessing ceremony. Should have capitalized the H there. This is the time of opening up the era of God's kingdom, Cheongguk, a time in which we can return to the heart of the one true God. Please engrave this point in your hearts. Hallelujah. Then we'll stop there. And we'll do this paragraph again next Wednesday. So we'll start with however next Wednesday. All right. That's all I have, all the time I have today. We're going up to page 40, I guess, up to page 40 today. So we're a little bit past the halfway point. Okay. I'll see you next week. God bless, Godspeed. May his kingdom come quickly.